Professor Cruz. I hope this video finds you well. Here's my presentation on the interactions between the Mongols and the Crusaders. So I know you already know this, quick disclaimer, it's still, a little difficult for me to type, so my presentation is going to be a lot of pictures and block text. I was able to copy and paste from my sources. I've highlighted the important parts and tried to delete some of the parts that aren't as relevant to my question. So I primarily look at textual evidence in the 13th century between the Christians, the Crusaders, and the Mongols. By doing so, the reader is able to discern the continuance of the themes of myth, the apocalypse, and divine punishment, as displayed in earlier crusades. But these texts also highlight the growth of the power of the nation in matters of religion and money, and the church's struggle to maintain its previous sway. The examples of diplomacy and the evolution of the relations between the Crusaders and their various sects and the Mongols reveals the fluidity and complexity of diplomatic relations at this time, which is often forgotten and oversimplified by modern society. Here's a cool GIF I found that shows just how quickly the Mongol Empire expanded. Here's an image of the Mongol Khanates at the rough time that we will be discussing. Likewise, here are some images of the Christian territories in Europe and in the Middle East. So the first figure we're going to talk about is the mythical Prester John. He's important because he was a very common legend at that time, and he was supposedly this Christian king that lived either out in far East Asia or in later times Ethiopia, and he was either going to conquer new lands or come save Christianity. Historians now think that these legends may have been inspired by Mongolian conquerors, maybe even Genghis Khan. And so he's important to our conversation because he highlights just how little the Europeans knew of the Mongols. All they knew was this myth of this great conquering force coming towards them. So the first letter we're going to look at is from Henry, Count of Lorraine, to the Duke of Brabant. It was written in 1241, and this letter is important for a multitude of reasons, but specifically for us, it highlights the reoccurring theme of the apocalypse, and it also emphasizes the growing importance of the nation state as it relates to the crusade. So first, the apocalypse. As we've seen before, just in our class, the coming of the apocalypse was very crucial in the role of crusades. When the Muslims took Jerusalem or when they made advances on Christian territory, it was a sign that the apocalypse was coming, and the Crusaders had to get Jerusalem back in order for the rapture to be able to occur. It was a big motivating force behind the initial Crusades. And so we see the same sentiment here. It's this continuing importance in Crusades of the apocalypse. Henry writes, "The dangers foretold in the scriptures in times of old are now springing up and breaking out. But crucially, this is not from the usual enemy. It's not from the Muslims. It's from this other horde that's coming." And so this shows how the apocalypse really could just be any threat to Christianity at that time. Secondly, this letter is important because it highlights the growing role of the nation state and religion in crusades. Previously, the Pope was the one who would call it, and granted, nobles and other important figures did a lot of fundraising for it, but they were the main organizer. Now it seems like Henry and his fellows are the one who have taken the initiative. They, on behalf of the Church Universal, have now, by the instrumentality of our prelates and the preacher and Minorite brethren, called a general crusade for as a matter connected with Christ to be preached, prayer and fasting to be enjoined, and our territory in general to be roused to war for the sake of Jesus Christ. So I think this highlights how maybe that the church during this time didn't have the power to call a crusade, so instead it was these state figures that would do so. So it highlights a change in crusades. This next letter is from Gregory IX to Bela IV of Hungary. It was written on June 16th, 1241, at which point the Mongols have already invaded Hungary. This letter is important because it also emphasizes the possible impotency of the Catholic Church at this time. and their failure to bring about an actual physical crusade against the Mongols, which is arguably the most important time for one when Europe Christendom is literally under attack versus when a city far away is. The reader can discern this from particularly the quote, "He tells the Hungarians to gird yourself vigorously and manfully as befits your royal greatness to the defense of the aforesaid realm and the Catholic faith." He does not call for an international crusade. He focuses instead on just this one nation. He does, for a larger group of people, say that everyone should don sackcloth and sprinkle themselves with ashes, with weeping and sighing. So instead he focuses on an international Christian-wide spiritual crusade, but stops short of actually calling for a concerted physical effort. Perhaps this is because other European countries are already mobilizing, but also it's because he couldn't. This Mongol threat perhaps reveals the weakening of the church's control over the Crusades and perhaps the relinquishing of it to some nations and other leaders. And here's another letter from Gregory IX, this time to the abbot of Heiligenkreuz. And just my apologies if I mispronounce anything in this presentation. It was written on June 19th, 1241, and this has a little stronger language than his previous letter, but it doesn't go quite as far as to call for a true crusade as we had seen in the past. He says that you ought not to neglect to persuade Catholic men with salutary admonitions. Likewise, he also says, we grant you full powers for applying the blessings of absolution according to the form of the church, and in addition the power to commute the vows of those who plan to depart in aid to the Holy Land, or vow another pilgrimage for the remedy of their sins to the crusade against the aforementioned Tartars. So we can see that he's trying to take crusaders from going to Jerusalem and redirect them to Hungary. He's trying to make this a crusade that's akin to the other ones, but the language is not. He's asking him to do it. You ought not to neglect. He's still not calling for one. He hasn't ordered a crusade, which I think still highlights perhaps the difficult political position of the church at this time and the change in the nature of the Crusades. Likewise, perhaps Gregory's lack of an official crusade shows a lack of desire on the parts of the peoples of Europe for a crusade, and if they don't want one when the enemy is literally at their door, there must have been a lack of any serious political or social will for them. And here's some text from the First Council of Lyons, specifically Canon 4 on the Tartars. It was written in 1245. And this is important because it highlights how the church is trying to be prepared for next time. They are admonishing, beseeching, urging, and commanding that European nations build up fortifications to prepare for another invasion so that the cult of Christian religion could be protected and even spread. And they say that next time that this happens, they shall contribute generously and will cause to be contributed towards all Christian regions in due proportion. So I think this shows how the Catholic Church, due to their essentially failure to call a real crusade against the Mongols, trying to reinvent themselves and trying to reassert their power as it relates to crusades. This is a letter written by Pope Innocent IV that he gave to be dispatched to the leader of the Mongols. It's entitled Cum Nam Solam. This letter is significant because one, it's the first contact, it's the start of relations between the Mongols and the Crusaders in a diplomatic sense, not just a warring sense. It strikes a very commanding tone. It condemns them for waging war upon Christian lands, but it also wishes to strike up a peaceful relationship, desiring to live together. It wants them to convert. It shows that the church wishes to gain power over them, because then by converting to Catholicism, the Pope would then have sway over them religiously, which would then turn into political control. And so yes, this was the very first communication. and it strikes up a serious, commanding, but not altogether hostile tone. And so here's a snippet of John of Carpini, as he's known in English, his text about the Mongols. He's a friar, even though he was 65 years old, Pope Innocent dispatched to deliver his letter Cum Non Solam. His writing was super important because it was the first kind of cross-cultural understanding of the two cultures. He represents the beginning of diplomatic relations, even though they were very fraught. And this is the letter from the leader of the Mongols, Guyuk, to Pope Innocent IV in response to his Cum Nam Solon. It was written in 1246, given to John of Carpini, and it takes a very strict tone. You shall say with a sincere heart, I will submit and serve you, or else they will know them as their enemy. And so this sets off a rather antagonistic beginning of diplomatic relations between the Crusades and the Mongols. But what is to come later shows how fluid and intricate diplomatic relations for Crusaders, Christendom, and others were at this time.